Hello and welcome to the second in this short season of SketchUp tutorials. This is the follow-up to a previous talk on plants, which was held yesterday. In the previous session, I talked about the placement, selection, where to get plants from, and putting them into a SketchUp model. And today I'm going to talk about really converting those into documentation, and we'll look a little bit about how to set up planting schemes in Layout and SketchUp. There are various ways and each has pros and cons. To remind you that today's session, as with all of the previous 3 sessions, the 2 on terrain and part 1 and part 2 on planting, is being recorded and will be available on the Elmtec YouTube website. You've registered for the webinar, so you will get a link when those are up. I believe some of them are already up, but this one should be up in the next 24 hours or so, but please be patient. Okay, let's get rid of this window. And it's not quite as graphic an interface as we've had over the past few sessions, but this is a simple plant plan, and it's been derived from a general garden. And this is flat. This could just as equally be a view top-down scene from a 3-dimensional model. But just to keep things simple, I've drawn it as a flat plan. And I'm going to create a planting plan from this view. So most of the work is done in SketchUp. You set up your design, you can push and pull, add color, and then you need to start determining what kind of views you want to put into your documentation set. And those might be construction views or presentation views or technical views. So this one I would really class as a technical view. It's describing, or it will describe when we populate it, how and where we're going to put the plants. And for that purpose, we need to start breaking down and thinking in advance of what our construction or our documentation set is going to be. So the first thing, as always, is to create a scene, which is the view that you would like to appear on your drawing. So in this case, I've set up a top-down view, and I've also switched it to black and white, because all I'm really interested in is the outline of each of the beds. And I might label up the beds 1, 2, 3, 4. You may know which beds are going to be which, but just for communicating to you, I've put some labels on. Now, there are various ways of doing planting schemes. So the first way is that I'm going to create some plant symbols. And to keep that really simple, I've already created them. And what I mean by create some plant symbols is I've got a set of circles. So all I've done is use the circle guide and draw a circle to a particular size. And these are the sizes that I might use for describing plants in circular notation. And I've put labels by them simply to remind me which ones are which. Now, we can use this in various ways, but I'm going to show you one particular method to start with. So here I've created them, I've lined them up, I've given them labels, I've grouped them, and not only have I grouped them, I've locked them. And that was simply a case of making everything here a group. It's got the blue line and then selecting lock. And that way I don't accidentally move them, change their size, anything else. I've also put them on their own tag. So you can see here I've got a GZ plant circle template. And whilst I was there, I also created another set of symbols, which are these, which are a couple of different styles of scale bar. And these will become evident as to why I do this in SketchUp rather than layout in a few moments. But at the moment, we'll just look at the circles. So I'm going to go back to black and white mode, and maybe I'll put on my scale bars. And I'm going to set up a bed view and create a scene. So view, animation, add scene. And I'm going to call this one bed 1. And we could do bed 2, but actually I can reuse the bed 1 scene for bed 2 and probably the others as well. Just note that my plant symbols are to the left of my drawings. So these will appear and I'll be able to crop them out. I'm leaving them so that they are visible. Next thing I need to do is save. And then I'm going to send this to layout. And layout, oops, has just opened up on my other screen. And here it is. Just resize it. So here it's automatically populated a standard, in this case, I think this is an A3, yep, A3 sheet, and it's brought in the last saved view. Now, when you're doing technical documents, things, whether it's construction drawings or planting plans, it helps to be very consistent because then you can set up assets and workflows that work to a standard procedure. One of those might be with your planting schemes is to determine in advance what scale you want to work to. And usually I would do a planting plan to 1 to 20 or 1 to 50 if it was a larger space. So I'm going to set this to a different scale and I'm going to go 1 to 20. Now, you might notice a little thing has happened in the bottom of my screen, which means I've got a little yellow triangle. And if I bring in or open up my SketchUp model window, what that means is I've switched off automatic refresh on my viewports. And we'll come back to that afterwards. But what I'm going to do in this case is I'm just going to press the manual render. So it's asking me, and that would be a case of doing each viewport, if I had multiple viewports, on a viewport by viewport basis. I'll explain all of that afterwards. So I'm just going to make sure that that's, for some reason, it's gone to 1 to 40. So hopefully, there we go, that's 1 to 50. I've got lots of stuff around it. I don't need all of the other bits and pieces. And so I'm just going to crop this down. There we go. So there is my bed 1 at 1 to 50. So having looked at that, I think, well, maybe I need to resize because it's sort of a bit small on the bed. So I'm going to go and pick, let's see if that's a better. No, that looks far too large. We'll go with the 1 to 50. So go back to 1 to 50. And there we go. And I'll just bring these in and then, whoops, God, I'm making this look very hard today. Re-render, that should be better. Okay, bed 1. Now, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to extend my window across and a bit further, and I'm hoping over here are my plant circles. And what I'm going to do is just crop that down again, because what I can do is if I make a duplicate I'm going to put this on automatic. If I drag this across, I'm going to try and reveal. There they go. They're just over there. So I'm going to take the same viewport or the clone of the viewport, and I'm just going to crop it down to the circles. And then I'm going to do another clone viewport, and I'm going to drag across, and then I'm just going to get those scale bars. Now, the purpose of cloning these viewports is that in some cases, whilst I've said work at 1 to 20 or 1 to 50 or whatever scale you want, sometimes you don't work at those scales, you work at odd scales, and it's just a necessity. But if you duplicate a viewport and you've already got a piece of geometry representing a scale bar, then this scale bar will be a duplicate of whatever scale the first viewport was set at. So you don't need to worry about setting individual drawings to scale in layout. You're just using cloned viewports and you're using the scale bar. So I can then put that scale bar in and I know it will be the correct representation for the main viewport. Scale bars and plans are usually quite important. They help determining positions if it's not evident. Now, what I've got here is another cloned viewport, which has been trimmed down to represent my plant bed. Again, what I could do here is I'm just going to trace over my circles. So that is now a 1 meter circle, and that is now a ½ meter circle. So I'm using my template here as a means of just creating circles that are the right size. I'm not actually bothered that then I could get them so that they snap, but these are plants. Every plant's individual. They never obey. You never get plants at ½ meter, so it's a symbolic method of representing plants. And simplistically, I can take these circles and then just start to populate and plant up the bed. What we're doing is we're drawing over the underlying geometry. A reason for doing this in layout is that we've got a huge amount of control over this geometry that we don't have over the underlying geometry that's come in from SketchUp. So for instance, here I've noticed that we've got fill. So if I go into the window and pick shape style, in fact, it's telling me that shape style is already open, and that would be, here we go. So I can switch off the fill. I can color things, I can change line weights, I can resize. So these are vector-based graphics, so that lots of adjustments are available. So at the moment, I'm just going to switch off the fill and simply plant up very quickly. And you will have your own preferences for how you do this, whether you have overlap or whether you set out in a grid. And this is as close to doing it on a drawing board as you can get. You're simply drawing circles and then you're going to give them labels. So it's a bit dumb, as in there's no intelligence behind it apart from your own. The software isn't doing anything, and it won't really do much by way of streamlining this process. On small projects, this can be as quick as any other method. So let's imagine that we've populated this whole bed. At its simplest, you can take a label tool and add a label and call it shrub or whatever you want to do. And you could say, ×2, or you might put 2 number, whatever your system is. And at the end of this, you would have to manually add up all of the plants. Again, just like it would be on a drawing board system. So this is a pure drawing package solution. You can add some enhanced graphics. You can pick, there we go. I can pick over objects and I can add adjoining or little symbols. Sometimes these, if you used fill last time, it remembers, so you might have to switch the fill off. And you can pick the lines and change the line style under the shape style. Maybe those are a little bit chunky, so I can determine how tight the dashing is. So maybe I can make that a little bit better. The other thing I can do is I can pick individual circles in this case, and I can change the line weight. So if I went all the way up to 2. If you're happy to have the overlapping circles, that's okay. You can trim out that bit. There isn't an automatic trim that occurs in SketchUp, but I do have a little scalpel tool, and a little cross comes up at the intersection, and then I can delete out these parts. And to go one stage further, I can glue both shapes back together so that now these two act as a single unit. So you can take that as far as you want. Adding the enhanced graphics will take time. So if you've got several of these beds and you're on the clock, then you might just want to forgo and just keep it simple. But if the project's important or you want it to look good, then sometimes this can really bring the scheme to life. And then at the end of doing the plan, you can just hide, switch off, delete your spare windows, and you can choose which one of these you want. So let's say I'll go with the bottom one, and that might be my scale bar. So that's a 1 to 50 scale bar. So that's planting plans at their most basic. If I want to now do a planting plan for bed 2, I would add a page. So if I open up my pages panel, I could add a new page, but I'm going to duplicate this page, and then I'm going to just delete all of my, I don't necessarily need to delete my plant symbols, but I can just re-crop my underlying viewport to the bed 2. And then I can start labeling up that one. Your system will dictate the way you work, but you might have one bed on one sheet if it's an A3 sheet. A little tip, nothing to do with SketchUp, but to do with planting. Bed 1 is up against that retaining wall, but this is the house where my mouse is. So if I was standing in front of this bed looking at it, all my labels would be in the orientation shown. Bed 2 is up against the fence, and there might be bed 1 below it. So it's likely that I would be stood above or to the right of this bed. So maybe consider rotating it as if you're stood in front of it, and then label it the correct way. Otherwise, the person who is planting up the scheme on site would have your diagram, but would be stood in the wrong place to read the labels. So you'd have to keep turning the drawing. So that's easily done just by rotating your viewport. Okay, so that's a really simple system. Now, whilst we're in layouts, I'm just going to go back and bring in this. Oops, there we go. Now, this is the model that I referenced a few times, just a really simple garden. And in the previous session, I was mentioning things like planting blocks, and this garden is made up of planting blocks. We're not specifically talking about the planting in here, but how you might bring in a illustration of what the garden looks like when planted into your layout documentation. And this garden is on the cusp because there are a lot of plants, there's a lot of geometry, and it behaves quite slowly in SketchUp, and I would expect it to behave very slowly in layout because layout has different ways of representing the graphics, and depending on the method you choose, it can be quite slow to ridiculously slow. So if I wanted to, I've set up my scenes, but if I wanted to take one of these scenes and put it into my layout documentation, so let's say it's this one here that's called presentation scene. So I'm just going to, let me see, oh, it's probably best if I send it straight from here. So if I send this to layout, and here it goes, it's just landed in layout. Whoops. So here it is, it's come in as a scene from SketchUp, but if I alter anything, or I move it, or I want to recrop it, so let's say I just alter this, and there we go, I get a spinning ball, and then it reprocesses. So there is a 4 or 5 second delay, which in this case isn't the end of the world. If you put in more planting, or your garden is larger, then especially with planting, then that delay gets excessive. And sometimes it can take 10 minutes. In some cases, I've had them take an hour, but I'm very impatient. I sometimes wonder if it's been going for 10 minutes, will it actually ever finish? And I usually don't let it extend beyond then, because I don't want to come back to it an hour later and find that it's still going, because that just is going to cause you problems every time you reposition or do something with your viewport. So one of the tricks, which is what was happening at the beginning, which is in your SketchUp model, switch off the auto re-render. So now when I move this window round and do something to it, nothing happens. It's not re-rendering itself. And you get that little yellow triangle in the corner. So even if I reshape this, it might not quite be the way I want it to be, because it's not reprocessing. But what that allows you to do is do several changes, set up other parts of your document, bring in drawings and references, and then when you're ready, render manually. That means it's just going to do one viewport. If you switch it back to auto, it will then do all viewports. And if you've got a 4 or 5 or a 10-page document, it's trying to do all of them, so it can then take ages. So particularly when you've got planting schemes in illustration, then I would always have it switched, have automatic switched off. The other thing that you can do is on some schemes, even if you're doing it on a viewport by viewport basis, it's still going to take ages. So a quick thing to do there is if I go back into my SketchUp window, and it seems a little brutal, but if I simply do a screen grab, and it's slightly different on Macs and PCs, but just grab a portion of the screen, that will do, throw it into your desktop or your downloads. And then if I go back into my layout window, which let's pull this one back across. I can find my layout window with the viewport. Here we go, it's this one. I can then file, insert, and hopefully it will be the last one, which is this one. And I can just add that as a viewport into my layout document. And so on a complex or a very large scheme, then that would be a much quicker method. It doesn't have the benefit of, if my SketchUp model changes, then none of the changes are reflected in these views. So these are the type of things that I would really create right at the end when I'm happy that that's how we're going to do the presentation, so that there are no last minute changes. But even if they are, they're relatively easy to retake. Just be careful. This is now essentially a JPEG or a PNG, so it can distort. It doesn't really scale, so make sure that you adjust the image proportionally. Just out of interest, you'll notice there's a difference between a screen grab from SketchUp and particularly on the color, saturation and contrast, and it looks slightly better when it comes out of SketchUp than it does in layout, but that's a little thing. So we'll keep that really simple. Now we're going to do a slight modification to the process, so I'm going to close that one down. I'm going to go back to let me just open up the one that we were working on, which is this one. So I'm just going to get rid of these plant symbols. So this is where we brought through a bed outline, black and white, brought in from SketchUp, set to a scale. In the previous version, we'd created our plant symbols, traced over them, and used those so that our plants were set to the correct size. But if you're going to use standard scales, then you can sort of bypass that and by using predetermined symbols. And one of the things in layout, or that layout has, is a library. And it is a completely customizable library. And it has some standard defaults, but the more you play around with the standard defaults, the more you realize they're not really appropriate for what you probably want to do. But you can customize and you can create your own. And it's called scrapbooks. And I'm just going to go up to my window and open up scrapbooks. And let me just resize it and bring it over. So here's scrapbooks. And inside scrapbooks is a whole load of these pre-created, pre-populated files. So let's go to people. And when you go to the main page of people, it's got 1 to 20 and they've got a description. But there's also a little tab at the top right-hand corner that is sort of indicating there is an additional page. So if I click that, it allows you to scroll through all of the additional pages. So we're not going to use metric. Obviously, they will in America, but there's a whole load of different scales or different graphics, the same graphics set at different sizes. And then we've also got those metric. So what you can do is go into here and, for instance, edit. You could just open up the, click the edit. It opens up that particular file. And then you'll notice when it's opened up the people file, if you look in your pages, all of those pages that we are able to scroll through are available. So if I don't want any of the, the Imperial Unit ones, I can just delete them. So if I delete this one, I just hit the minus button, and then I would simply say save. So file save. And there we've got, it's been fixed. So these are really useful symbols. So you may or may not like the ones available, but as I said, we can create our own. So let me just go back to our main page. Now in here are a whole load of things like TB. There's a whole different categories under TB, and for the life of me, I can't remember what TB stands for, but they're essentially drawing technical project symbols. So I can do there's elegance, simple is just different, NOR symbols. You get scale bars which you can modify, and text boxes. And if I just scroll through, bubbles, section lines, a whole load of stuff that even if you don't like, you can open them up and edit them. And if I drag one of these across, just as a demonstration, it's been grouped, but I can click in here and I can drive down and change any of the geometry that I want. And I can change color and typeface, and they're completely editable. But what's really nice is when you start creating your own. So, my own drafting symbols, my own irrigation symbols, my own electrical symbols. But what we're here to talk about is plants and plant symbols. So this is a simple panel that consists of several pages of planting symbols. And all I've done is create the same set of symbols and save them out at different scales. So here is 1 to 50, and these are 150 millimeter diameter plants, which maybe they're a bit small for the scheme that I have in mind. But if I move through, these are my 300 millimeter symbols. So I can simply drag these across, and I know that, excuse me, because my drawing is 1 to 50, these are going to work. And I might drag in, and I can rotate them, and I can flip them, and I can nest them, and it becomes a bit like a game of Tetris. You're just trying to pull some of these in and sort of get them to fit as best as you can. And maybe if I go back, and if I just go up to show you the 1 to 20 symbols, we've got the same thing. I've just noticed that for some reason my 1 to 50 has a page missing. So these symbols have all been created at different diameters and different configurations. So 7 plants can be put together in a very large number of ways. I've just chosen some popular ways or ways that I think would be useful. Same with 9 plants. And then 300. So I've just used standard symbols, standard plant diameter sizes. Now, these have already been cropped, so that they've been trimmed, they've got their center lines, and they've got a particular line weight. But what these don't do is they don't have a label. So if I wanted to put a description on that, I would then still have to go in and add a label, and whatever I'm going to call it, and I would still have to add a number. One of the advantages of using these symbols is once you've used them a few times, you sort of remember how many are in each of these clusters. And it could be that I could modify these further by adding a little number so that at a glance, I know that that is a cluster of however many are here, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that one's 9. So 9 number. But the labeling and the numbering on the label is still manual. But I created these simply because when I analyzed when doing plans and drawings, half of the time was spent actually setting out the location and circle configuration. And then the other half was on the labeling, if probably even less. So it gets you some of the way towards an automatic system. Which now brings me to another method, which is a way of calculating or SketchUp counting the plants that you put into a scheme. And just before I do that, I think I'll just bring in whoops, let me get that in. Here we go. I just thought I would quickly show you these, which I did a cut and paste. Layout is very adaptable. It's not dissimilar to PowerPoint. It's a sort of publishing cross between InDesign and PowerPoint, that you can create documents from it, but you can drag and put quite a lot of different types of media. So whilst we're bringing in SketchUp media, we can also add in photographs. So you can use whatever source of photographs you want, but you can start to create mood boards or references for materials, and in this case, plants, and give them labels. This is just a simple completed planting scheme, just showing line weights and standard plant configuration symbols just put together. They don't nest in the way that a complete grid of circles does, but if that's the way you work, then you might need to go and create symbols that reflect the way you like your planting to be set out. But that's a really just an illustration. I'll just close that down. The other thing you can do in layout is create completely new graphics. I do quite a bit of illustration for articles, books, magazines, and I almost invariably do all my illustration in layout rather than Adobe Illustrator, simply because I know the software and it's quicker, and I can bring in references from other sources that it's sometimes quite hard in things like Adobe Illustrator. But this is a type of graphic I use on every planting scheme. And all I've done is create a grid and some labels, and there really is no reference in here. These are just lines. I've not paid too much attention to everything being very accurate. And I've drawn these curves. And all I'm doing for firstly my benefit and then the benefit of the client is describing how a garden will look in graphic form. So if we look at something like a Rudbeckia, then it's going to start coming out of the ground about May, and then it's going to peak around September, and it's going to be a particular color, and then it will fade away and it'll get cut down. And it's a neat way of showing the peaks. And if you take your planting scheme and draw it in this way, then you probably realize everything peaks around July and August, and you need to spread it out a bit more. Some things like hebes are probably the same size all year round and evergreen, so it's a linear line. This isn't my original thoughts. This was derived, and I sort of developed it from Chris Marchant's work before she retired. But it's really easy to do, and you can just use the curve tools in the pencil line. And then finally, I just wanted to show this, not because of this planting scheme, but because of a couple of different techniques in this planting scheme. So here is an imported viewport from SketchUp with the plant symbols, and here is an overview of the site, and a couple of things in here. The first one is you could color all of these circles individually, and because they're grouped, you could then just apply a fill. So if I chose a fill, let me just go and get my crayon set, but if I chose pink, and then I can just change that or any other color that I want, but that can be a bit heavy. So another technique is where you can just draw around using your freehand pencil tool, apply a color. So let's go and apply a purpley color. Maybe I'm going to make it a bit more translucent. And then I'm also going to switch off the stroke. And it's akin to using tracing paper over quite primitive drawings that you would just add some emphasis. And I'm not drawing these lines particularly well, but you get the idea. And I always switch the stroke off, so it just gives you that hint. And I don't mind that the edges are a bit rough. I quite like that. It adds a simplicity, doesn't make it look too sharp. It shows that there's a blurring, but for lots of different reasons. You might not like it. The other thing it is quite useful for is sometimes you get whole areas that aren't really about technical representation of plant symbols through circles. It's just a general area that might be seeded or planted with bulbs. So you just want to create some indication. So you can do something like this. You can give it a fill, but you can also add a pattern. So if I go to my pattern in the shape style, and my pattern palette should have opened up somewhere. I can't find it. It's obviously hiding under something, but you can pick cross-hatching or nope, no idea where that's gone. Dots, but cross-hatching is usually my default. Don't have to have, and again, you can have the outline, but I always switch the stroke off. Right, so that's enough of that. Going to go back into my main SketchUp window. So let me just drag that across. And here we go. Okay, what I can also do is do my planting plan in SketchUp. And in SketchUp, it gives me some advantages, but there's a compromise to pay. And I'm hoping I can remember the sequence of this, because I usually have it set up so that I don't have to go back to first principles. We've got circle templates. We can do, the plants don't necessarily need to be circles. So I've got some plant symbols. So here you can see I've created or imported some circle symbols and just put them alongside. So I could have a whole row of 10, 20 different symbols that are 0.3, and again, a range of symbols at 0.5, etc., etc. So I've just put in a few here. These are components. So whether it's a circle or a complex symbol, it's been made into a group and then into a component, or directly into a component. And if I go into my entity info window, you can see that I've given it a name. In this case, Ilex crenata, or whatever name you want to give the plant. Here we've got a photinia. This one I think is a formium, and I can't remember what this one is, a fern. So it could be anything. So first thing is you need to give it a reference. Now, I would do this with a whole range of plants, all the plants that I wanted to use in a garden. And if I was creating an entire plant database, then I could have a couple of hundred of these. So it is, or it could be quite an undertaking. But once you set it up, then you can streamline things very quickly. I've also opened up the advanced attribute in entity info right at the bottom, and I've given it some more information, in this case, size. So if that's going to be my formium, I've just reminded myself that it's got a size of 600. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag some of my plants, and I'm going to move, and I'm going to drag a copy. And I'll just put a couple of these in my bed. Now I'm just drawing them on top of bed 1. Whoops. And then I'm going to do the same with maybe this one. So these are 1 meter across. These are quite medium-sized shrub type things. And then I'll maybe put some of these just over here. I'm not going to plant up the whole garden. I'm just going to. So I'm doing this individually. I could create these into masked blocks in the same way that we did in layout. So I could create them here. But at this stage, I'm just doing individual plants. And maybe I'll go, I don't know, ×6. Right. So what we've got is a group of plants, and I could plant up the whole garden, but we're just going to concentrate on bed 1. And it depends on how you want this to report out. What SketchUp can do is if I click on this, it knows it's a component. It knows its name, and without doing anything, it will tell me that in the entire model, there are 11 of them. So you don't actually need to do anything. You can just click on the individual plant symbol, and here we've got a fern, and there are 17, and here we've got the formium, and there are 7. There are 7 because I've got some other ones over here. So let's get rid of those so we don't confuse things. So hopefully there should only be 4 of them, the original and the 3 that I put in my plant bed. But if you want to start generating plant lists, then the way to do that is you need to generate a report. So if I go to File, near the bottom, it says Generate Report. Here we go, and it's just opened up. And you can create, so there's a standard template, so you can just create a new template. And I'll just show you. So if this, when you say create new or edit, then this comes up. You end up with empty stuff on the right-hand side and a long list of attributes. So if I go back to my entity info and pick one of the plants, we've got attribute labels. So there are boxes that have names, and these relate to some of those. There are standard things that each object you create in SketchUp has. For instance, its coordinate system. You don't get to choose except when you place it, and then the coordinates of that object are reported into the system. What materials and all those sorts of things. But what we're really looking for is its definition or its entity name. And we've got size and quantity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let me see, we'll take layer out. So we've got entity name, quantity, and size. Now, I'm grouping by entity name. You'll see how that reports out. If it doesn't quite give you the result that you're after, then maybe you need to rearrange the order of this. And there's quite a lot of playing around in here, and we don't have the time in this session to cover that. And I might do a separate session on how to create automatic reporting systems. But here, all I'm asking it to do is tell me how many of what name, and also, just for the sake of it, putting in size. So I'm now going to run the report. And here it is, the report's run. You end up with lots of rubbish because for every group that you've got in the model, then it will generate a report. I wouldn't worry at all about that. These ones at the bottom, for instance, are those little pre-configured plant symbols because they were given names, and you can see there's 1 of them. The bit that I'm interested in is the middle that says, the Ilex crenata, there are 5 of them, and at the moment they're all specified at 600 millimeters, etc., etc. So I've got a general model, got formium and a photinia. So I can download that straight into a file. We might call that one plant list 1. And I'm now going to go and open up that plant list. So bear with me. File open, and I'm going to go plant list 1. And I'm just going to drag that in. And there is the plant list that you saw with the labels. Now, I wasn't really bothered about some of this, so I literally just grab them or just grab the labels here and delete. And I don't need the model. And it's pretty easy just to take out the ones that you don't need. I haven't got it set up correctly because it doesn't recognize the symbols. So I might in SketchUp go back and make sure that I don't actually have graphic symbols. I just have numbers representing things like size, and I might qualify that by saying diameter millimeters in my description. So that gives me a simple report system based on how I structure my model. Now, there are all kinds of pros and cons with this. The first one is you don't really need to go out into layout. You could send this over to layout. So if I then set up bed 1, whoops, and switch on my plant symbols, and then I send to layout, I must do a save, and then send to layout. Oops. Got too many windows open, and don't save. Oh, for some reason, I've got something active that's, bear with me. Nope, I've got no idea why that won't. Apologize, I've got no idea why that won't actually activate. But the problem is you end up with exactly the same situation. So we'll go back to this one, which is you end up importing a load of symbols, albeit slightly differently, and they don't have attributes. They have names associated with them, but they don't have quantities. The quantity of these doesn't come through into layout. So you can then label, and the label will be automatic. It will tell you if it's a photinia or if it's an epimedium or whatever it is that you've labeled, but it will not give you the quantities. So you then still have to add the quantities. But then that's taken out another problem. So you can automate the system, the placing of the plants, and automate the labeling. So you're down to the final hurdle, which is you have to manually put the number in on the drawing. If I did this drawing in SketchUp, oops, let's then I could add a label in SketchUp, and I seem to have an ongoing problem at this end, so just bear with me. And there's my problem. Nope, I have to. Right. I've got a SketchUp window from the previous session, and it's not closing down, and I don't want to force it in case I lose everything for the last few minutes. So the labeling, as I was saying, would give you the right label, but not the quantities. So pros and cons, I'm afraid. It would be great if there was a little script that allowed you to group the geometry and do something through the tags system, and then in layout, pick those references up, but we're not quite there. We're frustratingly close. So it doesn't do fully automated plant counts, but you can get quite close. And you can do it by bed. So you can put all of these symbols, group them, place them on their own tag called bed 1, and then use the reference bed 1 as the filter, as the group the report by. So it will then show you all the plants in bed 1 and then list them if you want to do it. So maybe that's better on a larger scheme. One last tip on all of this is I would do this sort of work in a separate session of SketchUp. Don't try and do this in your main model. Once you've created your presentation, I would copy out the relevant geometry and then just keep your labeling, keep your grouping, keep your reporting within an entirely separate session, simply because you saw that it was picking up groups which were on other layers that were hidden. And so if you've got lots and lots of geometry, your spreadsheet could identify hundreds of groups that you forgot that you'd created. So it helps with your editing of a spreadsheet when they are really just focused on the plant names. Okay, any questions?
Hi everyone, it's Lauren from Elmtec. Thanks, Paul. That was fantastic again. We don't actually have any questions at the moment.
Oh,
Is that good or is that bad?
Completely overwhelming.
Yeah, I think that might be a good sign, actually.
Well, I'll go for a coffee whilst I'm ahead.
Yeah, we'll just have a break. Oh no, there we go. Suzanne, hi Suzanne. She's asking, oh, when are you doing more of these great webinars and what topics? That's nice.
I'm doing one on how to use SketchUp with Twinmotion, particularly on the workflow of and how to do it from the perspective of landscape design at the end of August. I'm doing another one on how to import a DWG file and manipulate it so that you can then start to extract the pieces of information for contours and buildings using a whole load of plugins. And that is in a couple of weeks, and that's on my Eventbrite page. And then just by doing this small session, I've sort of got a list of 3 or 4 things that I think would be really useful just by covering in a little webinar that I might advertise, and you'd be more than welcome to attend, but it will be free and I'll immediately put it up on a YouTube channel, whether it's Elmtec's or my own. But things like how to create a definitive color palette in SketchUp that has things like Faro and Ball colors or the Little Green Paint Company. So you can create your custom colors and maybe go into this idea of reporting in more detail so that you can, you could easily spend 45 minutes, an hour on it. And there are a couple of other aspects. You can embed a spreadsheet. So once you've generated this spreadsheet from SketchUp and edited it down to the things that you want, you can then take that same spreadsheet and import it and place it inside Layout. And you can then, when the spreadsheet changes, then it automatically changes in Layout. It's just a little bit of trickery on how you reference the files, but that's probably tackled as a separate subject. So I hope that keeps you interested. Any more questions? Okay. Right, I can't. So feel free to email me. If you have any general questions, then email Elmtec and maybe they can pass on any questions. So this has been recorded and it will be up on YouTube very shortly. So thank you very much for attending. And if you think of anything after the event, then I will try my best to help you. And until you join me next time,